Following program is sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts. Welcome to About Money, a different approach to investing you won't hear anywhere else. Your host, Mike Adams, is a registered investment advisor and works with investment portfolios exceeding over $100,000 in net worth and has a proven track record of managing long-term investments, surpassing the markets in the long term. The information shared in the following program is for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. And now, here's Mike.
And it is Saturday, and we're going to be talking about money. So on Friday, a week ago, the stock market lost 361 points. And then on Monday of this week, the market rallied. The Dow was up 7.7%. The Standard & Poor's was up 7%. And that was a market gain of 1,627 points in the Dow. And that's a combination that, in my opinion, had very special significance. It's something that happens very few times. It's something that has happened each time we've had a big sell-off in the market. And I'm going to get to that later in the program because I think it has special significance. It has significance on where the market is going and where investment should be. That's coming later in the program. Also coming in my program, I have a special guest today. We're going to be talking about marketing and an effective marketing program. So that's coming later in the program, but I want to begin with this. We've all gotten to know a lot more about viruses and genes and DNA, a lot more than we probably ever wanted to know during the last 2 months. I can remember the Time magazine that came out in 1965. It had a picture of the DNA, that helix, that wound round. I thought at the time, I was young, I was dumb, I thought at the time, so what? Well, that so what has become a huge factor in terms of investments, in terms of what's going on, and in terms of how it's affected our lives. Not that particular DNA, but what we've learned about DNA, RNA. That double strand has become so familiar, it's almost as familiar as the Colosseum in Rome or the Eiffel Tower in Paris. As a mathematician, it's almost as familiar as the Pythagorean theorem. I'll get that right. Pythagorean theorem. The a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's that double-strand DNA. Several years ago, I read a book called The Gene by Siddhartha Mukherjee. And he pointed out how DNA was truly an iconic image. It's just a combination of pairs of small proteins. An A protein is matched with a T, a G is matched with a C, and it's a long string of those. And of course, the A stands for adenine, which is actually a protein. It's an organic compound. 5 carbons, 5 hydrogens, 5 nitrogens. They're wound together. Thiamine, the T is carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen. Guanine is the G, same thing, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen. Cytokine is the same, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen. And they always combine together. You think those compounds and what the impact it is. They're just sugars and phosphates strung together in a chain that's twisted to the right like a wood screw. And the total size is 23 angstroms. It's tiny. 1 million of those side by side would be less than 1/8 of an inch. It's very long, it's very thin. And if you blew it up in size to the thickness of like a sewing machine thread, just think of a sewing machine thread and how thick that is. That sewing machine string would be 150 miles long. That's what DNA is. And both of those strands of DNA, when you look at the helix and the 2 strands, they both contain the same number of pairs in the same order. And those pairs, the AT, the GC, there's actually 3,088,286 and 401 that have been identified. Maybe there could be as many as 3.2 billion of those pairs in that long string. And if you just published the letters in a book, in a standard size book, just those 4 letters back, and published them 3 billion times, that'd be 6 billion letters, you'd have 1.3 million pages of a book, 66 times the size of the Encyclopedia Britannica. That's just to give you an idea of the DNA. There's 23 pairs of chromosomes. You know, when you look at it, 23 pairs of chromosomes in humans, in all apes and gorillas and chimpanzees and orangutans, they have 24 chromosomes. You know, when you think about it, during evolution, we lost one of those chromosomes, but we gained a thumb. So figure out how that worked. You know, DNA is encoding 20,687 genes. That's the total in the universe. And that's only 1,796 more than a worm has. But the fact is, our 20,000 genes is 12,000 fewer than corn has, or 25,000 fewer than wheat or rice have. The difference between a human being and cereal is not the number of genes, but the sophistication of how those genes work. I guess it's not what we have, but how we use it. In DNA, all those little tiny molecules, it's inventive, it's incredibly complex. And its simplicity, you know, when you think about the simplicity of those 4 nucleic acids, we get tremendous complexity out of it. Every individual is different. And that DNA can activate or repress actions in certain cells at certain times. There's nearly an infinite variation. And single genes can cause other genes or a combination of things to do certain actions at any given time. Think of birth, the differentiation of cells. Just that gene, that helix, causes ears to be made, and then no more, once. They make the same nose, or the organs, or the fingers, the heart, the lungs. Just that strand of DNA. It knows how to do that. It does it one time, and then it's over with. But it's dynamic as well. You know, shuffle the sequence in some cells to make novel variants of cells. The immune system. I mean, the DNA figures out how to secrete antibodies designed to attach and invade pathogens. And those pathogens that invade our body are constantly changing. And so the antibodies have to change as well. Our DNA knows that. You know, ever think about a puzzle that starts with one word and it changes to form another word. Hard to solve. It's hard to, you know, when you go through that. That's what our genes can do. And it's almost, when you think about it, a very beautiful kind of thing. Chromosome 11 has 155 genes that are just encoded to how we smell. A gene to recognize spearmint, another lemon, another jasmine, another vanilla, another pepper. And only part of those are transmitted to the brain. There's a different set for each smell. So it allows us to discriminate among thousands of cells, or smells. And those genes are only a very small part of the DNA strand. Only 2%. There's long stretches of the DNA between the genes, and we really don't understand at this time what they do. Are they functional, or are they just junk? Think about, you know, put it in the analogy, the Pacific Ocean with just a few islands in between. That's what the DNA is, like a long, long strand with very few genes in between. You know, and our DNA, the one that's in every one of our bodies, has fragments that date from ancient times. And not just ancient times, but ancient viruses. A lot of our DNA is not even human. These are the sequences of things that are repeated. These are the parts of the genome and the the DNA, which are inscrutable, they're vulnerable, they're resilient, they're adaptive, they're repetitive, they're unique, they're supposed to evolve, and some of it is linked to millions of years before, which really brings us to the COVID-19. It's a virus. Technical name is SARS-CoV-2. And actually COVID-19 is not the virus, that's the disease in the lungs. And what we know about that virus, what we've been learning about that virus, is something that is particular to that specific strand. It's just 27 to 34 base pairs. We have 3 billion. That little virus has just 27,000 to 34,000. They're still figuring that out. And what does that mean? It's put into a positive sense. It's a positive sense single-strand RNA genome. That means those 27 pairs are a single strand, whereas our DNA is double strand. It's a single strand. We'll come back. We're coming to a commercial break. Don't go away, because we'll come back. We'll talk about how all this applies and what we're seeing. We're learning a lot about viruses and about our own DNA. Don't go away. I'll be right back after the break. We've got a lot to come to. And I do want to talk about the market before we're done, and a great guest you want to hear. Don't go away.
About Money with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on Adams Financial Concepts. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So I've been talking about DNA. I started to talk about the COVID virus, or actually the SARS-CoV-2. When you look about viruses, they are all a special type of strand. They're RNAs, so they're just one string, not the double helix that we have in DNA. And the COVID virus, the SARS virus, is one which has a positive sense, single strand wound to the right, and it has only 27,000 to 34,000 pairs of those ATGC, same ones as we have in our body, those same little tiny proteins. And when we say it's a positive sense, as opposed to a negative sense, some viruses are negative. And what does it mean? A positive sense means that it can directly translate its DNA into the proteins in our cell. It takes over the cell's internal mechanism. You know, if you think of it in battle terms, what it does is it comes in and it conquers the cell and takes over. A virus that's a negative sense actually needs some of the cell mechanisms. It comes into the cell, and in battle terms, it has to make a truce with the cell and then control what goes forward. So the COVID virus, unlike a negative sense, a COVID comes into a cell, takes over the cell itself, takes over the proteins in the cell, and begins to manufacture millions of copies and spins those out into the bloodstream. All viruses that we have, not just the COVID, but all viruses tend to take over our bodies. Outside of our bodies, they're dormant. They survive, but not really living. But once inside our bodies, their machinery takes over. So if you've seen the pictures probably of the coronavirus, it's a sphere. It looks like a ball with spikes on the top of it. The spikes are actually proteins that stab into a cell. And once they stab into the cell, they conquer the cell mechanisms inside. And they command the cell. They begin to command it, take over, and produce more virus strands and spit those strands into the blood. One strand produces millions of additional strands, and each one of those strands attacks cells in our body and takes over the mechanism and continues that whole process. But our bodies, in response to that, our DNA detects the invasion. Even though our DNA, our bodies have never seen that virus, that invader before, even though it's never seen it, our DNA knows enough to figure out antibodies and antigens to fight the virus, and it goes to war. The coronavirus sets up a camp. Actually, it prefers to set up its base camp in the lungs, and our body sends the antigens. The antigens are the white blood cells to do battle. But the reality is, for many cases, the white blood cells are not as strong as the virus. And as the white blood cells die, our soldiers, the white blood cells are the soldiers, their bodies stack up. It's an infection. When you get an infection, you know that you have a pussy thing? What that pus is are white blood cells that have died. That's the soldiers in our body that have died. In our lungs, that pus begins to build up, and that pus actually begins to cut off the function of the lungs. They build up like a fluid in the lungs. And we don't know enough yet about the coronavirus to see exactly how it works, but we know from Spanish flu, that was the way the Spanish flu worked. It would build up enough pus that people actually drowned, suffocated to death because of the pus building up. Every time we have a weakened immune system, it's weakening the army, it's weakening the white blood cells. And weakened white blood cells have less of a chance to win the battle. And when the immune system can't equip the soldiers, you know what happens. We went through this with the Spanish flu, and I've talked about the Spanish flu before. We lost 50 million people. 50 million people died when the Spanish flu came around. The areas that really did okay were the areas where we had social distancing, by the way. So we know a lot more today as we fight the coronavirus than we did when the Spanish flu came out. We know that when we talk and when we breathe, we have little tiny droplets of water, and that we enclose that strand of virus into those little droplets of water, and they go into the air. And that's where we're in the midst right now. When we come out on the other side, and I talked about all this to understand where we go from here, what happens here. There is a biologic thing going on, but when we come out on the other side, my guess is going to be that there are going to be investments in companies that are finding a way to augment our body's defenses. Viruses are single-strand RNA molecules. They're wound and they're twisted. There's going to be research going on to see about what happens if you can unwind the strand, or if you can find another strand that fits into that RNA and connects with the RNA. There's going to be work going on to see if we can equip our bodies to recognize the virus and take it on. There's vaccine testing going on, but more important is what's going to be the research going on to treat viruses, not just the coronavirus, but the viruses in general immunity to viruses. My take is that in the next few years, we're going to see companies spring up that are going to look at how they can improve our bodies, how we can improve what we do. Think about research that might put a monkey wrench into the way that a virus works. The virus, those little spheres that attack the cell membrane, if they have they can do that because they have the same genetic code as the cells of our body. What happens if we change the genetic code of the cells of our body? You know, that's a perfect way to defeat a single virus that is negative for our bodies. That's coming down the road. Is it coming soon? I don't know. Is it going to be a year, 2 years, or 3 years? Maybe. But I do think there's going to be an emphasis, a worldwide emphasis on finding and doing the research to find a way to defeat viruses. So anytime we have a MERS or Ebola or a coronavirus, there'll be a way to adapt. We won't be waiting for a year or a year and a half for a vaccine. We'll have something that is specific that can go into our bodies and defeat the viruses before they really get started. That's coming down the road. That's my projection. And of course, it could be all false. We may never get there, but I strongly believe there will be investment opportunities to be done, and we'll be on the forefront of that. That's what I'm doing. Anyway, that wraps up this. I've got more to talk about the market and what went on, but before we get to that, I want to introduce my guest, Vlad Martumian.
Hey, Mike.
Did I say it correctly? Welcome to the program.
Yeah, Vlad Martumian.
So, Vlad, why don't we start with your background? Tell us about your background.
Sure. I'll give you the intro. So, basically, at 19, I was, just browsing on the Android App Store, and I barged into my cousin's room one day because I see that there's no Bruce Lee quotes on the Android App Store, and I didn't know that I was going to start a marketing agency. Before that, I just started with just a coincidence that I saw it wasn't on the App Store, and my cousin, who in middle school built his middle school's website, he actually said, hey, I can build that app, the Bruce Lee quotes app that doesn't exist. Chuck Norris was getting a lot of attention, and I was a big Bruce Lee fan. So I started my first app then. In 2 weeks, I got 1,000 downloads. And then after those 2 weeks, my cousin was like, well, what do we do now? I said, let's make 30 of these apps. So we ended up with 300,000 downloads and 30 apps. And I was thinking I was on top of the world, just like the coronavirus situation. You were talking about the economy was, going up and up and up. And I was thinking to myself, Zuckerberg, Schmuckerberg, business is easy, markets are easy and all that. And until I learned that you actually have to make money with your apps and ventures. And so I, came back down to earth. And so after that, at 21, I started my second company. So that was like my first venture. So at 21, I started my second startup. It was a real estate software company, and we ended up cold calling real estate brokerages, and I ended up getting into 15 different states, with the software, and I was growing that second business. It was a B2B, a business-to-business company. I was finally making money, and however, I wasn't growing fast enough. So that's when I decided about 5 years ago to start a marketing agency and just focus on marketing and how businesses can grow. Yeah.
And we're going to come back to that. Don't go away, because we are coming to a commercial break. So don't go away. We have a lot more to know, and Vlad's got a lot more to tell about his marketing agency.
About Money with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on Adams Financial Concepts. About Money with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
So I'm here with Vlad. I forgot to mention the name of the company, which is Logic Inbound. Sorry about that. Let's talk about Logic Inbound. Tell us about this company that you started.
Yeah. So I started it 5 years ago. Basically, we were growing my second company, and we weren't growing fast enough. So I figured, hey, if I learn how to do marketing, and if I learn how to show people something valuable and have them, give me their money in exchange for that, and look at it as a skill set, then I could, all my other ventures I do in the future, I'll position myself very well. And so Logic Inbound, originally, we started as a general digital marketing agency. But today, Mike, we just focus on one thing, and that's search engine optimization, a.k.a. Google. So if you type something in on Google, we're the ones that help businesses pop up on the first page and help people build their blogs and brands that way.
So when you talk about a marketing agency, a lot of marketing agencies try to try to be a specialist. You're really focused.
Yeah.
You know?
So exactly. So we decided to focus down on after our first year was really generic, right? So we decided to focus on Google search engine optimization, organic traffic, and that's really our skill set. So much so that we actually built software tools for people who are trying to build their content online and show up on the Google platform. And then obviously there's companies that do website design and Facebook ads and all that stuff that we don't. We just specialize in this Google organic traffic.
And what size of companies do you work with?
That's a great question. Right now I actually have 20 different types of clients. So for instance, you type in Seattle junk removal. One of our clients, Junk Be Gone, they'll pop up on the first page for that term. Then we've got a CPR Northwest Washington, if you type in CPR Seattle. So everything from junk removal to, CPR, mainly services companies, but we also have, kratom companies and e-commerce, people that sell things on websites. We've done that as well. But services is really the primary focus.
And so talk about the process of the SEO.
Yeah, happy to do that. A lot of people, when the first misconception they have whenever they want to start their own blog or brand, we've done reputation management for people before, and basically they think that if you just write online, you just write a lot of content, and you just keep talking about what you do, you'll get traffic, and that's true to a small extent. However, I like to give people the example of being a great singer but not having a great manager, right? You can sing as great as you can in your bedroom, or maybe at local shows. However, if you really want to blow up and get a lot of attention, you need to get other people to put you, on their live TV shows and radio and all that stuff. So what we do is we do that with something called link building. So what that means is we get your website to be basically a source of authority from other people's websites. So, for example, if Forbes, shows that Logic Inbound and says Logic Inbound is a great website, check them out, that'll earn a lot of trust through Google. So we'll do link building. We'll help them structure their content and like what they talk about in a very good way so Google knows exactly what they want to rank for. So that's called content building. And then lastly, we'll work with them on the technical side. We'll speed their site up. We'll make sure there's no broken pages. So it goes link building, technical, and content. So those are the three essentials that everybody needs to know when it comes to SEO and how to raise in Google.
So what's the process? How do you evaluate if your website is really working?
That's a fantastic question, right? And a lot of people, I would say, they don't do this enough, Mike. So that's a really good question you asked there. I would say, first of all, you've got to have, if you're paying an agency or if you're doing it yourself, no matter what, have 3-month goals, right? Quarterly goals. And basically, if you're not hitting your quarterly goals or if you're not even coming close, then obviously your SEO goal is failing, right? So that's the first thing is we like to do something with our clients called, KPI goals. So we'll set key performance indicators. So if you're like a junkyard company, for example, and you want to get phone calls, we'll make that our goal. And we'll tell you how many phone calls we generated. And so we generate reports for them about biweekly or monthly sometimes, depending on what they want. And that's how they can see whether their business is improving or, not going in the right directions. The other thing is there's views, and you can look at your website for certain keywords that, you're ranking for today that you haven't in the past. Those are all ways to tell that it's working. But at the end of the day, if you're not getting the results you want in terms of like business success, then the whole campaign is just a waste of time. So you got to make sure that you are business-minded first and foremost with the end goal in mind.
So, I've had experience. I had a website from 2005. I hired a company, a national company. I was paying $1,000 or $2,000 a month, and it wasn't working. When they set up, they owned all this content, and when they decided to change companies, they said they wanted to keep the content. I had to redevelop a website because they own all that. The second company that I got was a company that was a young company. They did a really good job in designing the website, but after a few years, the company came apart and they were no longer around. And so we were left with a website without any knowledge on how to modify or change it. So tell us how we get around those kind of things. How do you know if you've got the right website designer, and how do you know if you've got the right optimization going on?
Fantastic. I mean, Mike, that's another really good question, right? Because, and this is something everybody needs to write down at home. Your website designer, right, is not a search engine optimization company, and that's different from, the Facebook ads, and that's different from your IT guy. These are all different industries, right? This would be the equivalent, letting one agency, most business owners, I don't know about your personal situation, Mike, but when I talk to most business owners, in fact, I went live today, and basically this woman, she had these people design her site. Then they promised her these goals. They didn't show her any tracking, any metrics. They didn't show her prior success in her category or industry. So she kind of went through with them because they built her website and she trusted these guys. And unfortunately, this industry, much like obviously it happens in every industry, but especially in SEO and the online world, everyone has to be very skeptical. In fact, I tell people from the start, be skeptical. If you're talking to an agency, for example, Mike, if I'm talking to you and I say, hey, can you be my banker, right? I'm hoping you're going to say no, right? In the agency world, for some reason, bad agencies, they'll say yes and they can do everything. Yes, I can do Facebook, I can do this, I can do that. So basically, the key here is to listen to your agency and ask them, what can't you do? Try to catch them saying no to something and being vulnerable, because most of the time, it's not like that in this world, unfortunately. So, those are some key ingredients there to picking the right agency. Testimonials, them being vulnerable, saying no to you on certain things they can or can't do. Education, that's huge. And then lastly, also, you have to make sure, and I've caught this a couple of times, and this really, it gets my blood boiling. You have to own your hosting information. You have to own your website. Make sure that you're the person that is the owner under every single account, and everybody under you is the manager, because about 3 times now I've went to other companies and their agency owned everything, and that's just, not the good way to do it.
I know. I can speak from experience. So what kind of a return on investment should somebody expect from hiring an SEO company?
This is another really good question, Mike, because I actually just wrote a blog post on this. I would say that the first thing you should know when doing marketing for yourself, right, is you got to think of what do you want. Like I said, start with the end goal. And based on what you want, that's when you figure out what your marketing spend is going to be. So, for example, if you want to do $1 million in revenue from marketing, I'm not talking about your existing clients. I'm not talking about sales. I'm just saying your marketing. If you want to do $1 million, be prepared to spend about 20% on that, because you're going to want to get 5 times $5 for every dollar you spend on your marketing. That's a really good campaign, and that's a campaign you should be looking at. So, for example, if you want to do $1 million, like I said, $200,000 is what you should be prepared to spend in a year. It doesn't have to be all to SEO. That's one channel. It might be pay-per-click, et cetera. Now, if you want to go even deeper, right, then what you should do is you should look at your industry and see, how good is my website in terms of getting people to convert, how many clients that are actually leads are actually going to convert. Like let's say I generate you 5 leads. Are you going to close all of them? And that's how you see if you can afford to do the campaign. I would recommend nobody spend more than 20% of their yearly revenue on marketing, right? So if your business did, whatever, $200,000, you shouldn't spend more than $40,000 this year on online marketing. And yeah,
that's great. So, Vlad, tell us how people can get a hold of you and how can they enlist your services?
Thank you so much. Yeah, appreciate it. So people can, my email is Vlad, VLAD, at Logic Inbound, LOGICINBOUND.com, logicinbound.com. That's the website and my email address, and people can find me that way.
And people can go to the website as well, right?
Yep. Yeah, go to the Logic Inbound website, logicinbound.com.
Okay. For listeners, you should do that. If you have questions about the website, about your own website, about how it's working and how much business you're getting, you should get in contact with Vlad.
About Money with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on Adams Financial Concepts. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So a week ago Friday, the market went tumbling down 361 points. It didn't actually go tumbling down. It just looked like it was on a slide drifting down. But on Monday, the market rallied. The Dow was up 7.7, Standard & Poor's up 7%. Market up a total of 1,627 points. And that's a combination, I think, that has special significance. So I want to talk about that. Going back to February 22nd, when the market began to decline, what you had is you had a few buyers. You had short sellers that were covering their shorts. You had a few buyers who were looking at prices down, thinking, those are prices I would have bought at before. But most of the sell-off was you had sellers and very few buyers. You had very few people that were willing to step in and buy, but you had a lot of people that were just selling at whatever price they could get. And the volume of trades was actually 2 to 3 times the daily average. So you had a huge volume, a huge amount of selling. But to understand what was going on there and what happened last Friday and Monday, you have to understand how the market works. When you put in an order to buy or sell, it goes to an exchange, say the New York Stock Exchange, and you have computers on both sides, but there's also a person there. You see the pictures. You've seen the pictures of the New York Stock Exchange with the broker brokering the stock. There's that person that's making the market is a market maker. With computers, there's traders can be anywhere in the world, but there's always a person that's there, and that person is a market maker, or he works for a market maker. Market makers are required to, or they're set up by each exchange in their bylaws. They have to be approved by the SEC, and their obligation is to make an orderly market in whatever stocks they make a market in. Some people on the New York Stock Exchange only make a market in one single stock. Some people on NASDAQ stocks will make a market in 1, 2, or even 5 different stocks. And what they do is they'll post a bid at which price they'll buy a stock, and they'll post an offer at which price they will sell a stock. And beginning on February, they have to do a minimum of 1,000 shares. They'll do more or less sometimes, but they have to do a minimum of what they'll buy or what they'll sell for. And when you buy a stock, if you want to buy ABC, for example, at $30.25, 30.25, and a market maker could have his bid up there at 30, so you're 25 cents higher than the bid, but it may take a long time to find somebody that's willing to sell you the stock at 30.25. So if you put in a market order, you could put in the market order, the market could look like it was selling. The last sale was at 30, but when you put in a market order, the seller sells you the stock at 31. So that's what market makers do. They make an orderly market, and they can sit there during that time, and during normal times, they will list stocks. They will make a sale. They'll make a buy. They try to end the day with no stock in their inventory. That's how they like to end the day, so that for every order that comes in, they will have an order that goes out. Every buy they match with a sale. If they can't match buys with sells, they have to be the other side of the action. So if there are a lot of sellers, they have to be the buyers. If there are a lot of buyers and no sellers, they have to be the sellers. And if they don't have any stock in inventory, they have to short the stock out of to the buyers. If there is stock in the inventory, they can move it at whatever price. So that's what a market maker does. And it's important to understand that during that period in February and going through March, what we had was a whole lot of sellers and very few buyers. So the market makers have to make an orderly market in the stock, and what they do is they'll look at what the sellers are selling, and they'll set their price. If they're the only buyer in the market, they'll set their price at a level where they think that they can sell the stock at another day or another week, and they can sell that stock and get it out of their inventory at a small profit. So that is where market makers were, and that's what was happening in that February 27th to March 23rd time. They were the buyers. So they ended up at the end of the day with more and more and more stock sitting on their inventories. Now, not only do they end up with the stock, but they end up with an obligation to pay the sellers for that stock. Back in 1987, when this happened, most of the brokerage firms were separate from the banks, and so the brokerage firms had to buy from the banks, and there's a whole story about that I'm not going to get into. But today, most of the brokerage firms who are market makers are owned by the banks, and the banks have the ability to go to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve dropped their interest rate to zero, meaning that the banks could go to the Federal Reserve, borrow the money from the banks to pay for the stock which they bought, and so the banks ended up with a big stack of stock, a big pile of stock in their inventory, and a loan to the Federal Reserve to pay for it. Now, as prices came down, you had institutions that were looking at stock prices that were at levels they hadn't seen since 2016 or 2017. Incredibly, what they thought were undervalued stocks, but they wanted to buy, but institutions didn't have a lot of cash. Institutions needed to sell something in order to create cash so that they could buy these cheap stocks. They didn't want to sell their other stocks that they held at a loss. So enter again the Fed. And the Fed announced they were going to put $700 billion into the bond market, buying corporate bonds, municipal bonds, and commercial paper, which institutions will have not just stocks, they'll have bonds. And some of those bonds are going to be coming out. And the Federal Reserve then funded the institutions. The Federal Reserve bought those bonds, the institutions had the cash, and so the institutions started to buy the stock from the inventory from the market makers, which now brings us to March 23rd. And when the market hit that bottom on that, a week ago Friday, on Friday the 23rd. That's when institutions began to buy. They'd gotten cash from selling to the Federal Reserve. Now they had cash to go in and buy stocks. And the market makers now had buyers, and they had stock that they could sell. But in total, for over a week, the sales had been more than twice the daily volume. So they had a huge amount. So a week ago last Friday, what happened is the market makers got rid of all their stock, and we started to see the market surge again. It appears that March 23rd was the bottom of the market, and what we're going to see is the market begin to climb up again. And next week, when we're back, I will be talking about what we can expect if March 23rd was actually a bottom. That wraps up for today. Have a great week and a great weekend.
You've been listening to About Money with Mike Adams, a registered investment advisor. If you'd like more information about what you heard today, or about Mike's investment philosophy and strategy, or if you'd like Mike to evaluate your own portfolio, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com. The information shared in the preceding program was for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. Join us again next Saturday at noon for more About Money with Mike Adams here on AM 1590. The Answer. The preceding program was sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts.